Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our February night school class, which is typically in person and streaming. But Rick and I talked last week and we decided we would switch it over to online only or in your own homes for everyone. Just we've had a few scheduling issues with the church, and just for some consistency, and also it allows for everyone to be on the same platform and for Rick to be able to share resources on the screen during the class. We're giving this a try. So here we all are on this last week of February, in which we are now already 2 weeks or in our second week of Lent. So thank you all for joining us from wherever you're from. We've heard people from here in the Oregon area, whether that's in the city or out on the coast, and Arizona and Washington and Canada and Texas and all over. So that's another wonderful thing about the possibility of being able to gather online. So with our night school class, the idea is that Father Gans will take us into this topic of choice, which this series is on angels, and he will lead us into it and go as deep as possible within this 1 hour. And the hope is that it will spark some thoughts and ideas and interest that as we all conclude, you can continue on with the study of the topic or the reading of this book that this evening will be touching on. But there will be a lot in this. And I know we all have a great interest in this topic of angels. And last month, the idea of angels shifted for me and for likely many of you as we will be going through different people who have written and studied and taught on angels over the years and centuries. So tonight we will be with Father Jean Danielou, and Father Gans will get us going in that. And we just thank you all for being here. Good to have you.
Well, thank you, Mary. Let me just invite us to into this prayer that I was taught as a little kid to pray. And it sounded like this. Angel of God, my guardian dear, to whom God's love commits me here. Ever this day be at my side, to light and guard, rule and guide. Amen. There was a learned an artistic type Frenchman by the name of James Tissot, who lived from 1836 to 1902, who, because of his good looks, his culture, he got all tangled up in some really messy human temptations, got all mixed up. And he had a vision one day. He doesn't talk about it, at least in any source that I've ever found, but it profoundly impacted him in a way that we're reminded of some like St. Paul on the road to Damascus. It was clearly a profound thing that happened to him. And from that point on, he dedicated his life and all his painting skill to painting what turned out to be 350 watercolors from the life of Christ, an illustrated New Testament, if you will. And he painted the scenes as he contemplated and prayed with each of the scenes. And then at a certain point, he went off to the Middle East. And he spent a long time sketching the landscape so he could get it just right. And then he returned to France and took all those sketches and put them in behind, if you will, the paintings he'd already made of the scenes from the Gospels. I'd like to have you look at one with me. This was painted by James Tissot in 1890, so 12 years before he died. It is one of the most remarkable paintings I have ever seen of the crucifixion. And I'm just going to pop it up by sharing screen with you, that ability that this medium gives to us. And I want to just take a look at it and see if you understand it. Begin to understand it. Let me put it that way. Okay, now let me come to the Zoom here and go to the share screen and go here. Okay, you ready? Here we go. Let yourself zoom in on it. Look at the detail, the minute study of vesture, both military and common folk, the look of the land, the trees, the kinds of stones. And all the unique expressions on each face. Do you see what's so stunning about this? Every painting I know of, probably you know of the crucifixion is always looking up at the crucifix from some point of view, looking up at the crucified Lord. And this painting is we're up there with Jesus looking out, looking down at the people. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Looking with Jesus' own eyes out into the world, if you will. At the moment his love was the purest. Having lost everything, he poured out even that. And what I'd like to have you notice is straight ahead in the hillside is the grave, the tomb that he's going to be put into. That's how this painting is conceived. And if you notice that black hole in the earth, just to the right of it, sitting on a stone wall, are two white figures. And I'm quite convinced that those are the two angels that Mary Magdalene would find sitting inside the tomb when she went the day after he was buried in that tomb and saw two angels looking back at her. In the crowd, the angels look like everyone else, but Jesus sees them. And they who were there from the moment his birth was announced and they filled the sky, they're still there at the end, as if looking, and he looking at them. Remarkable. Any comment? Let me just do a quick comment. Any comment? You looking at it.
This is Diana. I never really thought about there being many people there. Having
Yeah.
never seen that perspective. I mean, Mary and and such folks, but I never would have thought there was a lot of townsfolk and followers, and those that weren't followers, and those that were curious and such. So it's so interesting to contemplate that and
Isn't
think
that
that
fun?
there could have been many that were watching that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Rick,
Yeah.
I must admit, when I first looked at the picture, I was drawn to the men on the horses, and I just on first glance, the first thing that I thought of was the Magi on camels. And there was something about the look of them. At first, because then I would looked at it harder. I saw that, well, they weren't on camels; they were on horses. But at the same time, why would somebody be there? They don't look like they belong. They look different than what you would necessarily expect, and there are three of them. And so I wondered if what he was thinking about along the lines of what you said about the two angels was the Magi there at his birth. Is there a representation of the three wise men at his death?
Very nice. Thank you. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah.
Tom
Hey, Rick.
Gornick, go ahead, Tom.
Oh,
I was just going to kind of build on what Mark just said. The fact that the angels accompany him here it confirms that they were with him all along. They were at the desert. We know on Ash Wednesday or the first Sunday of Lent, we hear that story. But obviously, they were there from the beginning to the end and beyond.
Absolutely. And they appear at multiple points in the testimony. We're going to see that today. And we both see them and don't see them at the same time. We don't pay attention to. No, it said they were angels. Well,
And
let me.
I like
Go ahead.
I like what you said, Rick, about the two angels there, but angels just being the ordinary people in the crowd, because we all know that there are angels all around us and we're never quite sure who they are. So that's what I was thinking of when you said that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lynn. That's a very interesting point we're going to get to in just a minute here. That comes up very quickly here. Let me stop the share for a minute here, and let me take a step with you. Thank you for your comments there. I want to tell you a story just to kind of set it up to capture something of what we're talking about. His name was Father Burke, Jim Burke. He was a Jesuit. He had come from what is called the Missouri province. That's where he grew up and was formed and did a lot of his priestly ministry. And at the last part of his life, when he was just terribly old like I am, he came to Gonzaga University in Spokane, where I was at multiple times in my life. And he was definitely a holy man. He taught in the adult education program in the theology department. And it was his turn on a winter day to get in a car from the Jesuit community there at Gonzaga University and drive north out of Spokane and head all the way up into the remote reaches of the Columbia River. As it moves, we would say moves up, is actually moving down out of Canada. And there's a highway that follows the river, and it's very remote out there. It's dramatic landscape, desert, rumpled, rolling hills, the deep cut of the Columbia River. There's not much out there. And it was cold, down around 0, and there was lots of snow. And he's driving north on a Friday in order to get there before it's dark, if he could, and to teach that weekend at an extension program from Gonzaga University of teaching theology up in Canada. Because as Catherine Kelly knows, who's online here, Canadians don't know anything about God, so they really need our help, especially Gonzaga. So anyway, up he went. Now he's driving along the road, and he got caught on black ice, and the car flew off the road, plunged down 10, 12 feet through 4 feet of snow, steeply down off the side of the road. Because of the heavy snow, he wasn't hurt. The car didn't roll. It just sort of plowed through the snow and came to a rest. And after the shock of that, it suddenly started to dawn, like will happen to us when we get into messes. It suddenly begins to dawn on us like, oh my gosh. No one's going to see me. There's hardly anyone on that road, but I'm so steeply down off the side, no one will see me there. That starts to dawn on him. Then he realizes the snow is so tight in along the doors that he can't push the door to get it out, get the door open. Let alone if he got out, he wasn't sure at 72 or whatever he was years old, that he could climb through 4 feet of snow up that steep embankment and get up onto the road in the hopes that maybe a car or truck would come by and he could get help. And remember, it was down around 0. It was freezing cold. Well, what he tried to do is he rolled down the window. He thought, I've got to get out of here and at least try to get up to the road. And as he opened the window, he heard a voice. It said, hey, you doing okay down there? And he seemed so startled. It was just so quiet. And he looks up, steeply up through the open window, and he sees all the way up on the road 2 men looking down at him. And he said, yes, I can't get out. I'm stuck. And they said, just hold on. We'll come down and help you. So the 2 of them came over the bank and came down through the snow to the car. And one of them walked up to the window and he said, okay, you just stay there, put your car in neutral, put your hands on the wheel, and he and I will push you out of here. So he went, okay. And so he put his hands on the wheel and they said, are you ready? And he goes, yep. And so they pushed the car out. Well, awesome. I'm out of here. Car comes up on the road. And then it struck him how impossible that was. Really? So it's starting to just shake him a little bit. And so he immediately gets out to thank them. Opens the door, gets out. No one. As far as the eye could see. Completely alone out there. In my experience, when I've told stories like this, and I have quite a few, if I'm in a group of 3 or 4 or 5, there'll always be another person who will say, well, you know, I had an experience like this. And they will proceed to tell it. And they usually precede it with language like, I had this weird experience. Do you see, built right in to the way we talk about angels is a belief that they're fantastical, that they're not really. That's when we think about it later. But in the moment when it happens, we know exactly what just happened. We just can't explain it. And this is true throughout the biblical record. If you go back and read and watch the text, angels appear all the way through the Old Testament, and they appear all the way through the ministry of Christ. They're everywhere. We just don't pay attention to them. That is interesting. I've thought about, and so I want to think about with you, because it comes up in this part of our exploration of angels, is why would the angels appear as they did to Father Burke, which once he realized that there was no one there on that road, it began to strike him that both of them were in short sleeves. and both looked incredibly healthy. Only after the fact did he start to pay attention. Why would angels, why do they have a capacity to appear like us? We know from last time that angels are created. They aren't divine beings. They are to us, if you will, as maybe the ants think about humans. We're of such a different magnitude that maybe ants spent most of their life imagining that we aren't really around anywhere. And when we appear, well, that's just stories that we've heard when we were young ants. We don't pay attention. But doesn't it make sense? It certainly makes sense to me. Is that it would be the courtesy of heaven to appear to us in a form that we can bear. And if we've already excluded from our consciousness that angels, as incorporeal beings created by God just before God created humans, wouldn't they have to appear to us as part of the courtesy of heaven in a form that we can recognize? So they appear like humans. But does that sound magical to you? Well, just think about it. Think about your power to imagine you're someone else than who you really are. It is one of the most central and obvious things about human beings that we have the hardest time just being ourselves, knowing who we are and living that confidently. Many of us are vexed our whole lives by trying to appear like something else than what we are. In other words, it is an analogy to angels who are able to appear other than they are, but in their case, in order to be able to communicate to us God's providence, to demonstrate to us God's providence. I offer that as just as an analogy for you to think about. We talked last time, and here I'm just trying to summarize because some of you are new. I'm just going to catch you up on a couple of points. That, again, angels were created. The biblical record is very clear about this, and the long history of the study and contemplation by some of the greatest minds the church has ever known have taken angels and their reality with deep seriousness. Angels, according to God's purpose, have been built in to the functioning of the universe. They don't come from outside the universe. They're built into it as part of the process. And the way we have come to understand the angels is that they are beings of a higher order than we, who are deeply aware of God's purpose when he created the whole universe and continues to sustain the universe with his power and goodness. And the angels are mediators of that purpose and the sustaining of the order of the universe. I talked last time how angels, because they're completely aligned with God's purpose, and they only do what God is doing, that we can slip and imagine that if I only do, let's say you or me, exactly what God wishes to be done, Doesn't that suggest, you or me might imagine, that we have no will of our own? And therefore, we're not free. But do you see the slip in the logic there? God makes us according to a particular purpose, designed a particular way. And we can freely choose, like the angels, to be in accord with the way God made us, or to go off and try to imagine and build ourselves another way. For us to freely choose to be as God made us to be is the ultimate act of free will, the purest form of freedom to be exactly as God made us. And last time, so again, these are just some points that I'm quickly summarizing from last time to just get your mind going. At the very last of the last time, I spoke that because angels are among us, and in the ancient tradition, we're going to talk about this, are guardian spirits in this world. We might imagine that they are there for our service, for us to use as we want. And in that regard, I said angels are not our personal valets. In fact, angels are often present in our life to test us, to push us, to make demands on us, so that we come into sync with the overall purpose of God for ourselves and for the world in which we inhabit. Now, I want to just take a step now into some new matter and to get you thinking. We talked last time how angels have no personal names except for three. The angel Gabriel, the angel Raphael we saw last week in the Book of Tobit, and the angel Michael. Those are the three named ones that the tradition has preserved. All the other angels, and they seem to be countless, especially if each person has an angel. That's a lot of angels. They don't have personal names. Their name means sent. So who they are is what they do in alignment with God's purpose for everybody. Let me give an analogy to this. This very thing about being named according to what we do actually runs deep in the human story. I want you to think about last names. It was very typical that last names were the names of what a family or a person did. Think of last name Carpenter, Cooper, Plumber, Baker, Smith, Farrier, Farmer, Fisher, Sawyer, etc. Families were defined, marked, not so much by their personality, but the role they served in the human community is how they were known. That's an analogy to what angels have been understood to be. I want to talk now, before taking a turn and coming into the work that Danielou has done for us, I want to talk to you about a profound thought that has become associated with the angels through the thought of a late 5th and early 6th century profound thinker who had a huge impact in the understanding of angels, both East and Western Christianity. Dionysius the Areopagite coined a term that when we use that term today, it's so distorted from what it originally meant. I need to explain what that is. Dionysius the Areopagite coined a term, hierarchy. That was he invented that noun. And it's based on the Greek, archos and hieros. It means a source of light. And it's based on an insight that you and I can easily make looking through the human community, that for reasons we cannot explain, there are some people that are born into the world so stunningly gifted, as if just born remarkably gifted. And it's very clear when we look at a Mozart or whoever it is, that that's just at a whole nother level than anything that you or I are. There are people that we have encountered who, at least in their own self-understanding, and as far as we can see, lack so much. And we wonder, how in the world will they find their way? Either through the social circumstances of their life or how they were born or what. In other words, there's an entire range, different degrees of gift that God has put into the world. And sometimes when we see someone super gifted, we say, well, they're lucky. But what Dionysius recognized is that it was God's original purpose to create angelic communities and also human communities with all different degrees of capacity and gift. So, and here's the point, so that those who have more gifts freely share those with those lacking them, who are capable of receiving what they have to give to them. It creates, it necessitates, it requires, the human family requires community, a sharing through each of the ranks. We build this into our school systems in this country, where presumably a teacher knows more than his or her students. And so their whole role is designed to freely share what they have with those who don't have that. And to learn how to do that with courtesy and skill is part of God's purpose, was the idea, was in the insight of Dionysius. And that God does the same thing, that he created the angelic orders from the topmost level, the seraphim and the cherubim, all the way down to archangels and angels, each of those ranks of angels with different degrees of gifts that they're capable of sharing with the rank below them. And so the whole system is meant to create sharing and a community based on gratitude, that those who have what I don't have freely give to me what I need with courtesy, not condescension. And that I, because I received that so beautifully from my teacher, I will pass it on to someone who doesn't have that. And I will pass it on in my own unique way. And I do it because I'm grateful that I received it so well. It's my joy to pass it on to the next level. This is how Dionysius understood hierarchy. Each person is a source of light, and they are meant to share it. Let me just pause for a minute and just check in with you. Any thoughts running through your mind right now that would be helpful to us to be able to hear?
Hey, Rick, it's interesting what you say about hierarchy, because I think we really butchered up the whole definition right now in terms of what hierarchy is and how we sort of look at it from a power standpoint and things like that. How much the sharing.
It's so true. It is possible for those who have more of whatever gift it is to hoard it and not share down the ranks. Of course, that's possible. We see that all through human history. But it was Dionysius's insight based on things that Christ himself said about Christ himself, to his own example, who had so much riches, debased himself, did not deem equality with God, the upper ranks, something to be held on to, but emptied himself, pouring himself out to those most in need of what he so richly had to give. And we got to watch him in the New Testament, person by person, learning how to give what he had in a way that didn't condescend, whether it was a prostitute or a tax collector or a demon filled, a man filled with demons, a way of graciously pouring what he had, the light he was, into them. So you're right, hierarchy gets distorted, and the loss of that sense of community, of beautiful gifts spread out through the whole structure of being, and each level of being, if you will, recognizing its gift and learning how to give it to the rank below, so that they also then can take what they learned and in their own unique way, pass it on to the rank below. And so as the gifts descend through the different ranks and the different degrees of skill or capacity that people have, what returns is gratitude and amazement back up the ladder, if you will, of being. That there are such people who so generously give what they have to those, if you will, beneath them in the order of things. And when everyone shares that way, this is the vision of the angelic realm as Dionysius understood it and taught it, and so profoundly influenced our thinking about angels and about humans, is the point of God is not that everyone has the same gifts. They're all different in different degrees, and getting us to share those and learn how, and not hoard or possess or be envious of those up above that they have it, instead of paying attention to what I have that I need to give to those that I can give it to. Hierarchy gets all out of whack when people get jealous or looking up the ladder, wishing they had what the upper people have, instead of looking down, which is where they're supposed to give their gift, because they have it to give. And they are the ones most capable of giving it. Someone way up the rank might not be at all capable. Someone who's a doctorate in something or other could not give his or her gift to someone in grade school. But someone who learned and went to school from someone who taught them, and then they were taught by them, and that person became a grade school teacher, and that person learned how to pass on what they learned, precisely what that person that they taught was able to learn from them. That was the vision of community that all came from a reflection on Christ, who was so filled and gave richly all the way down the line to people who needed it, not just the theologians or the experts. Do you get a sense of the image here? Any other comment?
Hey, this is Tyler here.
Hey, Tyler.
Hey, I was just thinking that kind of seemed like that was Lucifer's issue, right?
We're going to come to this very thing about why did that fall apart? What in the angelic realm went wrong with Lucifer, which in the ancient understanding and the biblical understanding is that Lucifer was the angel particularly given the task of overseeing, if you will, our world. He was the guardian angel of our world. But before we get there, let me just back up, Tyler, and just get us there, okay?
Yep.
I want to come to and just kind of walk you through some of what Jean Danielou has said in a short book called The Angels and Their Mission, published in 1952 in French and published eventually in English in 1957. And it's still in print, a beautiful little book. I won't in detail, but I'll just pick up certain points that come from there, some of extraordinary beauty. He first talks in the book about that the angels that appear within the what we call the Old Testament, when God chose through Abraham to be directly involved with humans and picked a people all his own, that the angels served as interpreters of God's purpose, as meeting the people in the Old Testament in disguise, if you will, appearing like humans, who gave them instructions about things they are to do. We think of example of the 3 men who come and visit Abraham and tell him that he and his wife are going to have a child. And she laughs. Back in the 10th, they're like, she's way too old for that. And so she laughs. There's a famous story there. And those turned out to be angels, and they recognized them after they were gone, that that's what they were. We remember Abraham when he was sent to sacrifice his son. That was his discernment. That's how he understood what God was asking. And it was an angel who stayed his hand, said, do not do that. So you see the angels appearing, later on with, in Isaac and Jacob, and the famous story of the ladder going up and down. When Isaac is running from his brother who wants to kill him, and the angels appear to him and instruct him about his future. The angels in the Old Testament appear as preparing a people to receive in the future the coming of Christ. The angels also appear in the world religions. We see them all over in the other religions, angels that appear there. And what I do, the simple thought I want to leave with you is this one. One of the great mysteries of the human history is, why was it around 200 before Christ to 200 after Christ, all across the globe, there was an extraordinary burst of creativity that created some of the most brilliant thinkers of all time. In India, in China, in Greece, in the Holy Land, in the Mayan civilization, the Aztec civilization. There was this band all across, if you will, right across the globe, this explosion of incredible profoundness. It's one of the wonders and mysteries of human history. Why did that all happen? Well, if you remember, at least when I was a young one, there was a book that came out called Chariots of the Gods. And it was his crazy stipulation, I think his last name was Lindsay as an author, was that aliens had come in spaceships and come down to Earth, and they are the reason that all of this happened, that they gave knowledge from another planet or galaxy or something, and that there was too much evidence of this leap in consciousness that happened during this time. There's nothing to account for the leap that happened there. It has been the understanding within the biblical story, because of how they appear, as this was the work of angels and their appearance in other religions and other places on the planet. At the time of the Nativity of Christ, this is one of the first and most famous places we as Christians encounter the angels, is on the night that Christ was born. We know the beautiful story about the angels appearing, an angel appearing to the shepherds and announcing that the Christ had been born in Bethlehem. And after he announces that and sends the shepherds to go find the child, and behold, the heaven is filled with heavenly host of angels. The understanding of this is that these created beings, that there were two kinds of angels. There were those that had a mission on earth here to guard, to guide, to light, and to inspire humans to recognize the voice of God and follow God. And there were the higher angels who dwelt closer to the heavens, to Christ and to the Trinity, if you will. And what happened is that those ones, the angels of heaven, were the ones that came down with the descent of the divine Son being born, and were greeted by the earth angels, if you will. That both came together and celebrated the birth of the Christ child. Why? The great teaching, and this is Jean Danielou's book, is talking about what the first centuries, 6 centuries of the greatest teachers and thinkers of Christianity have put together, have understood about angels from the biblical record, the account of the presence of angels and other cultures. Is that the earth angels, in their mission to guide humanity to be ready to be brought back to God, had become so wicked that the angels that worked their mission among humans had lost their ability to successfully bring humans to God and keep them aware of God. In order to get an analogy to what the thinkers were thinking about the angels that lived here, are things that you and I might well. Have you ever had this thought? Have you ever wondered? Let's just say that we humans are getting past our ability to look after ourselves and to care for each other and to learn how to work at common cause for the good of all of us. Have you ever felt that thought creep in? And you see all sorts of people jumping up and saying, well, I can fix it, I can off, and you know they can't. This is something deeper in the human story. There's a sense of something broken. It was this insight that the great early thinkers, that the joy of the angels is that God himself came down to heal what they could not do. The unexpected decision of God himself, utterly other, that one of them would let go of all of that and descend below the angels to become human like us, so that from the inside, God would understand our need, which we in our lostness had lost our ability to even know what our need was. And so the astonishment of the angelic hosts at the birth of the second divine person, born of Mary, was part of the joy of the angels at the Nativity. We see that the angels appear in Jesus' life at different times in his life. I mentioned at the beginning the presence of the angels at the tomb, at the end of his life, and after his resurrection. But the most important of all the mysteries of Christ's life is one that over the past probably 15 years only started to dawn on me, was probably the feast day, if you will, that Jesus loved the most. And it's one we used to celebrate in the Catholic tradition on a Thursday in the middle of a week, and we called it Ascension Thursday. It was a set-aside day in which all Catholics were required to go to church. And I always wondered, with Christmas and Easter, the Ascension just seemed like, he's gone. But really, this is in some ways one of the most profound feasts of all. And it's one that is particularly important in the doctrine of angels. What is it about? It says that after 40 days, in other words, some sufficient time that the resurrected Christ walked among his disciples, taught, was with them, that he was raised back to heaven and returned to his Father. To sit at the right hand of the Father is the symbol we use. But what we forget to notice is that when Jesus was raised, he took our humanity with him. So it wasn't in the tomb that just this ghostly spirit came out, but the body of Christ, the one we knew that was wounded, that had a shape, a face, and a voice. That's what the disciples saw in the resurrection. They both recognized him and didn't recognize him. They were afraid to ask him who he was, even though they knew it was Jesus, is how the language goes in the resurrection account. That what happens is that when Jesus returns to the Trinity, he carries in with him our humanity into the very heart of God's own personal identity as God. And this is so startling and a complete overturning of the expectation that something so low could be exalted above the angels and sit at the right hand of the Father and the Spirit. Now, to come to you, Tyler, in the deep thinking about the angels, it was this realization that caused Lucifer, the guardian of the earth, to rebel. Why should a being so much beneath all the ranks of the angels be the means by which not only humanity is saved, but also the angelic orders are saved, and that a human is brought into the very heart of God above all the ranks of the angels? And so the understanding is that the fall of some of the angels was jealousy. So as Jesus, the second divine person who became Jesus of Nazareth, overturned the whole order, if you will, of the divine transcendence by letting go of it all and exercising his divinity as a human being. So when he returned to the Trinity, he overturned the whole rank of the created order through all the angels by putting a human into the very self-identity of God. We have never before in the night school ever set it up in such a way that we take a single theme and step by step we develop it across each of the 5 parts of a series of the night school. In our first part 1, I wanted you to encounter narratively the presence of an angel appearing in this world to simple folks, 2 families, both broken, that thought they had no connection to each other, and an angel working in humble human circumstances with simple folk, bring the 2 families together and heal both of them. The famous story in the Book of Tobit. This time, I wanted to, in a certain way, much more about thoughts and certain abstractions, to try to summarize certain lines of the tradition, how it has thought about the angels in relation to this world. And so it came from this book by Danielou. Next time, we'll take a look at St. Augustine, one of the profound thinkers in the early tradition, and how he understood how human history develops, what human history actually is, and the role angels play with humans in the unfolding of history, especially in one of his most famous books that took him decades to write, called The City of God. The goal of this series was to open a way for you and me to find new lines of thinking into the presence of angels that start to cut away at all the mythology around angels and the pretty pictures of angels, all white, usually all golden haired with red lips and wings, to cut through all of that into something much more serious, much more central to God's purpose as he works in the world. And one of the things that I want to leave you with as a thought that motivated me to choose this particular topic is I have noticed for 10 or 15 years, the growing development of this interest, especially through the Marvel franchise, of making movies about what are called superheroes with all these special powers, and how widely this gained notice, how popular this kind of film literature has been. And I have wondered whether at some level, those fanciful tales about superheroes is the human soul remembering angels that it used to more confidently walk with and rely upon. And we who have mythologized angels right out of our awareness have lost contact with the friendship that God intended us to have, and to rely confidently on the presence of angels as we make our way through this world. These are some of the things I'm just want to have you wonder about. Okay. Give me just a moment. Angel of God, my guardian dear, to whom God's love commits me here. Ever this day be at my side, to light and guard, rule and guide. Amen. Back to you, Mary.
Thank you, Father Gans. And thank you all for joining us this evening. Father Gans set it up very well for what will be our next night school class next month, continuing with this series in which we will learn more about Saint Augustine, and that will be on the third Tuesday of the month. But between now and then, we have our Faber sessions that continues on with the Chronicles of Narnia. And that will actually be next Monday, also here online, where we will be discussing The Horse and His Boy. So you're always welcome to join in through the Faber sessions or the night school, whether you've been able to join some or none, you're always welcome. And I will send an email with some reminders about those upcoming dates, as well as recordings of tonight's talk, and that will lead you to our website where you can see talks from past weeks and such. I also hope that you all have seen the Lenten meditations that have been coming out each Sunday that have been led by Tara Ludwig, and those are in podcast form, but also written on our website if that is something that would lead you through the Lenten season in a positive way. So thank you again for being here. Feel free to unmute and say goodbye as you go, and we hope to see you soon. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Right.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
It's
you.
nice
Good
to
night.
see you. Really nice to have you here.